Story number 1. My name is Michelle, and ever since we were married, she had my undivided attention. She looked amazing for her 47 years. I often told my wife that Aunt Samantha must have had countless suitors when she was young. She would reply by saying that she and Uncle Gregoire had been together for 18 years. It is worth noting that Aunt Samantha is my wife's own aunt. Gradually, I found myself thinking of her more and more often. I was mesmerized by every aspect of her hair, her gestures, her delightful and pleasant perfume. Gradually, I began to ask her about life and love. And during one of their conversations, when she uttered the words, "Gregoire is no longer the same, and I am tired of everything," I realized that I could help her. However, I could no longer look at her calmly. I decided to wait for the right opportunity and make a move. And you know what? A week later, the opportunity finally presented itself. My wife had gone hunting for 2 days with her father and Uncle Gregoire, and I didn't like that sort of thing. Toward evening, Aunt Samantha came to visit, and we talked on various subjects while preparing ourselves a light supper. "Shall we not have a drink at supper, Aunt Samantha?" "I have some brandy," I said, smiling and looking at her. "Why not? We can drink some," she agreed. Dinner passed very quickly. The bottle of brandy we drank completely. We talked for a long time afterward. I wanted to kiss her several times, but I held back. A slight shiver ran through my body, and images flashed through my mind, some realistic, others less so. I grew bolder and stroked her hand. I started telling her that she was such a beautiful woman, that I had never met anyone like her. She smiled and kissed my cheek. "We're drunk, Michelle, and it's getting late. We need to go home." "Aunt Samantha, then stay. Our relatives won't be back until tomorrow night." I realized I had to make up my mind, or it would end in disaster again. In the hallway, she slipped on her heels and dropped her raincoat. "Well, I'm off. Thank you for your hospitality," she said with a smile, and leaned over to kiss me on the cheek as usual. Taking advantage of this, I nestled my lips against hers. "Michelle, you realize you can't do this. We're almost family," she said, half seriously. "But you're so beautiful. I've been in love with you for a long time," I whispered. It was evident that my words made her float, and she threw her coat off her shoulders. "Oh, Michelle, stop. This is unbearable." "I'm staying," she said, took off her shoes too, and putting her arms around me, asked quietly, "I hope it will remain just between us." I smiled and replied, "Of course, my Samantha." After that, the darkness of the apartment engulfed us. In the morning, she ran home, having arranged to meet while her husband was not at home. Someone will say that this is wrong, but I have fallen in love with this woman up to my ears and have no intention of backing down. Samantha and I began a secret affair that lasted several months. We spent time together at every opportunity, entranced by the passion and excitement of our relationship. Over time, guilt began to weigh on Samantha. She loved her husband, despite his faults, and knew she had an obligation to remain faithful to him even if the spark had faded. One day, with tears in her eyes, she told me that we had to end it. As much as it pained me, I knew she was right. My wife noticed over time that there was a growing distance between her aunt and me. When she asked if anything was wrong, I denied that we had any misunderstandings, but admitted that we had a fight. The family tension was intense, but we didn't judge it. I still remember Samantha fondly from time to time, but I know that our affair was an indiscreet mistake, no matter how powerful it seemed at the time. These days, I try to appreciate the love that is right in front of me, with my wife, rather than chasing fleeting passion elsewhere. Our marriage has had its ups and downs, but we have built a solid life together that I wouldn't trade for anything. Story number 2. The weather outside is so nice this warm spring. I was lucky enough to have 2 days off, which doesn't happen very often. When I have the opportunity, I usually visit my grandmother in the village to spend time with her and help around the house. She lives alone, so I try to visit her regularly. Sometimes my sister accompanies me, and once my wife joined us. However, she didn't like the village very much and preferred to do her business in town this time. As usual, I set off early in the morning when the roads were free, and in a couple of hours, I reached my grandmother's house. This time I arrived at 9:00 a.m., and to my delight, my grandmother had already prepared breakfast for me. "Hey, Michael, what's up? Anything exciting going on at your place?" "Greetings, Grandma, the usual. Is there a reason for your fancy outfit today? Is something wrong? You don't like my dress?" "No, I like it. It's just that you look unusually radiant today and sexy." "Stop it. You're embarrassing me." "No, I'm not embarrassing. But honestly, you look great tonight. Are you expecting someone?" "Michael, go ahead and eat." "Stop embarrassing me. You're the only man in my life." "That's fine." "I don't mind. I don't mind." She looked so cute in that dress. It emphasized her figure, and the dress was a little shorter than she usually wore. Despite her 60s, she looks 50. Even her neighbor Jessica is younger than her grandmother and looks a little older than her years, and she is the one we are going to talk about. "Michael didn't want to ask you, but we need to help Jessica chop wood. You help her. She lives alone. Her daughters rarely come, and there is no one to help her, as not to help her best friend." Not even 10 minutes later, Jessica came running to our house. She looked great at the age of 53, with a good bust and beautiful legs. "Hello, Michael. You're going to help me today." "Hello? I'll help you. Of course I will. Of course I will." Jessica was happy and smiling. There was a strange light in her eyes, but I paid no attention to it. We were about to go to her house, but we had no sooner left the house, as we were stopped by Grandmother. "Look at me, Jessica," said Grandmother. "Do not get him drunk with wine. A little drink is nothing. What kind of man is it if he does not drink, really, Michael?" Of course, Jessica. This conversation was over, and we went to her house a couple of hours chopping wood, and Jessica stacked them near the bath and tried to seduce me with her forms. "Michael, the bathhouse is ready if you want to go wash up." "I'd love to, Jessica." "Then finish up. You've chopped enough wood. Let's go for a swim. Have a glass of my wine. I make it myself." "Of course I will." There was a table outside, specially prepared for me, and we sat down, had one drink, then another. Her cheeks became pink from the drink, and we went with her to the bathhouse. In the anteroom, I undressed and went inside. It was quite hot in the bathhouse. I remembered an incident when, as a teenager, my boyfriend and I had peeped at Jessica's and her daughters through a small window while they were bathing in the bathhouse, and I even felt a little ashamed of the incident. It was clear how this trip to the bathhouse could end. I don't know how much time passed while we were having fun, but it seemed like an eternity to me. She had worn me out so much. Her face was shining, her eyes were looking at me devotedly, and her breathing was so heavy. "Did you have a good time?" "Very well, Jessica. Let's get some rest." "Come on, Michael. Let's go inside and sit and have a drink together. At least an hour alone with a human being." We threw on sheets and went into the house, where there was food on the table and delicious wine. She twirled around me like a young girl after a passionate kiss, trying to please me in every possible way, pouring and pouring homemade wine. An hour passed, maybe more. What was happening to me? I didn't understand. 10 minutes later, she was already there, pouring alcohol into glasses. We sat for another half an hour. Then, having said goodbye to Jessica's, I went home to my grandmother's. That was the end of my visit to Jessica's. I returned to my grandmother's house in the evening, my head still slightly dizzy from the wine and our adventures with Jessica. When I walk in the door, my grandmother looks up from her knitting and a smile appears on her face. "Did you have a good time helping Jessica?" she asks, raising one eyebrow meaningfully. Despite this, I feel my face blush. My grandmother has always seen right through me. I chopped some wood, and then we rested for a while. I answer evasively. My grandmother chuckles. "I'm sure you did," she says. She pats the empty chair next to her. Come on, sit with me. I sink gratefully onto the soft cushion. It's been a hard day. Grandma reaches over and gently pats my knee. Jessica is a good woman, and she's lonely, she says. I'm glad you were able to spend time together. I look at my grandmother in surprise. You're not mad? I ask hesitantly. She snorts. Good God, no. I may be old, but I'm not dead. I know you have certain needs, like Jessica has from time to time, I suppose. She gives me a sly wink. My grandmother has always been progressive and open-minded, much more so than my other relatives. I guess I shouldn't be shocked by her reaction to my adventures with my neighbor. For a few minutes, we sit in comfortable silence while my grandmother continues to knit, and the clicking of the needles becomes a soothing background rhythm. My thoughts return to my old life. Tomorrow, I have to go back to the city, a day I'll remember for a long time. Story number 3. I have always liked beautiful and mature women. Even though I was young, I never had the confidence to approach them. I went to different places, mostly nightclubs, with a suitable group of friends. At first, I just spent money on booze and didn't make any meaningful acquaintances. But the more often I visited these places, the more I gained confidence and courage. It all comes with experience, you know. So let's dive into my story. Hi, I'm Elijah, a regular 25-year-old guy. I'm tall, slim, and love sports. After my military service, I got a job at a big company and started living life to the fullest. Clubs, bars, you name it. My friends and I would often go to the bar and then continue to party at different parties. We had one regular place where most of the people were between the ages of 35 and 50, and guess what? 70% of them were women. So the next night, we were back at the same place again. As always, there were a lot of women around, but it was her that caught my attention. She was standing at the bar, sipping a cocktail. She looked to be about 40, average height. I stood quite far away from her, gazing into the shimmering surroundings, and decided to move closer to get a better look at this attractive woman. As I approached the bar, I ordered myself a beer and watched her. She was truly stunning, meticulously grooming herself with fitness and beauty salons. Blonde hair, slim waist, she had it all. She was a real charmer. I won't say I fell in love, but she definitely intrigued me. I didn't know where to start or how to approach her to get her interested, so I continued to watch her. She was sitting there enjoying a cocktail and not dancing. She was approached by many men, rich and muscular. However, she quickly turned them all down. I had the impression that she was a very choosy woman and that her presence here tonight was a coincidence. Nevertheless, I plucked up my courage and approached her. I introduced myself and asked if I could buy her a drink. Surprisingly, she didn't refuse. Her name was Amelia. We exchanged glances, and a conversation flowed easily between us. Feeling a little cocky, I asked Amelia, "Forgive me for my frankness, but may I ask what you are looking for here, or who you are looking for?" She replied, "I come here to relax and enjoy the atmosphere. Of course, I don't mind meeting nice people. However, most of the men who approach me are jerks. They're either drunk, flaunting their money, or making inappropriate propositions. I'm not interested in that. I prefer younger guys who are kinder and better socialized." After her words, I talked a little about myself, mentioning that I prefer older women like her. That's why I mustered up the courage to approach her. Her smile was absolutely adorable, and she said, "Look, Elijah, you're a great guy. You're so easy and nice to talk to. Why don't you come over to my house and we can continue our conversation in a more relaxed setting?" To say I was dumbfounded is to say nothing. We grabbed another bottle of wine and headed to her house. Once inside, I looked around and noted how spacious and inviting the apartment was. I decided to undress and make my way to the kitchen. Amelia told me that she would be joining me soon. As I was putting the wine on the table, Amelia surprised me by coming up behind me and kissing me. As you can imagine, we ended up having a relationship then. I woke up the next morning to Amelia gently waking me up with a kiss and serving me coffee in bed. Her beautiful body, which was hidden behind a light robe, gave me desire, and my friend wanted in on the action. And we repeated everything that had happened during the night. I call her Aunt Amelia affectionately, and she scolds me for it. But when she gets angry, I want to play adult games with her even more. Our relationship continues to this day. I do not care that she is older by 15 years. The numbers do not mean anything. The main thing that my friend and soul want to be near her. Story number 4. If only her husband hadn't fallen into a drunken stupor that night. If only he'd taken her away from the rowdy party. If only he'd shown any interest in her. What happened next wouldn't have happened. If only, damn it, he wasn't snoring so obnoxiously loudly and with disgusting sounds right now. Archie was sleeping peacefully, completely oblivious to anything, and that annoyed her more than anything. Today they were visiting a neighbor and had a great time, drinking a lot. The neighbor's son, George, had joined them. She liked this young man, and it was obvious that the feelings were mutual, but for some reason, their relationship wasn't working out. They were both busy, and she was married, though she had feelings for George. But today was a special day. Archie's husband got drunk quickly and went to bed. Meanwhile, the party was just getting started. Dancing began, followed by other fun antics. Tonight, Sarah was acting a little more reckless than a decent wife should. She danced and even kissed George. However, she stopped in time and went home to her intoxicated husband. But she only went home to make sure he was asleep and to spend more time with George. She felt it with her feminine intuition and knew that eventually something would happen between them. Perhaps it would have happened sooner, but there was always a formal reason to abandon the idea. A husband, societal norms, and most importantly, the fear of being caught. What if Archie found out? And if he did, he'd never forgive her. Sarah was sure of it. What would happen then? How would she live alone? She had tried to resist it, but there was nothing she could do about it now. She was drawn to her neighbor's apartment, the floor below, where a young man was waiting for her. Waiting even though all the other guests had long since left. Even though his parents were already asleep, he was sitting in the kitchen, keeping his eyes on the screen of his phone. For some reason, Sarah is sure he's texting her. It is at that moment that he realizes he can't resist contacting her. After all, how could they have forgotten that passionate kiss just 30 minutes ago? Suddenly, the phone lying on the shelf lights up, indicating a silent text message. Sarah, deep in thought, decides to mute it. But why? After all, her husband won't hear anything, will he? Waking Archie in his current state seemed impossible, as Sarah had seen so many times before. Grinning mischievously, Sarah opens the message from George and looks at her snoring husband. "Are you asleep?" In the same instant, Sarah is hit with a rush of excitement. Ever since they had parted, she had longed to see him again. Glancing at her husband, who looked miserable in his slumber, she begins to think of a response to George. "I'm waiting for you. Come, mine is already asleep." A few minutes later, George is standing on her doorstep. Aunt Sarah looks at him, and he looks back at her. A short time passes, and George wraps his arms around her and kisses her gently on the lips. The darkness of the apartment envelops them both, and her husband's snoring is a comforting reminder that he will not take them by surprise. The next morning, Sarah woke up in George's arms. Memories of their passionate night came flooding back to her. To her surprise, she felt no shame or remorse. Finding herself next to George, she felt that it was right, that she was finally completely her own. Looking at George's sleeping face, she realized that this wasn't just a fling. What they had bonded over was real. She had fallen in love with him. The sound of Archie snoring from the other room made her more annoyed than guilty. George woke up shortly afterward and immediately began kissing her neck and pulling her to him. That was incredible. he murmured. "You're incredible." Sarah smiled and pulled him to her for a long kiss. Things were working out with George in a way they never had with Archie. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found any excuse to spend more time with George while Archie was busy or passed out from drinking. She felt more alive and desirable than she had in years. They began to talk about a future together. Eventually, the affair forced Sarah to make a choice. When Archie left on a business trip, she packed her things and left a note saying she wanted a divorce. She moved into George's small apartment. For a while, the gossip swirled around her, but Sarah didn't care. She had found her soulmate. Archie was desperate to win her back at first, but eventually resigned himself to the fact that the marriage was over. Sarah is now married to George and is grateful to him for that first bright night that made her stop being content with the life she had. Breaking up with Archie was the best decision of her life. Her only regret is that she didn't have the courage to do it all sooner. But now the future looks bright with the man she loves by her side. Story number 5. My name is Pamela, and I am a 40-year-old from a small town in the state of Texas. Despite my past sins of infidelity, I am deeply in love with my wonderful husband, with whom we share a son. Let me tell you about one week in my life that may not have been the best, but was definitely unforgettable. This particular week occurred in the winter of 2014 when my husband and son went to Aspen for winter vacation, and I was home alone. Being a tall and slender brunette, I attracted the attention of many men who often underestimated my true age at first glance. One morning when I woke up and headed for the bathroom, I was stopped by the sound of the phone. In a hurry, I rushed into the living room and answered the call. It was Angela, my son's godmother, inviting me to join her later that evening. She offered to have a heart-to-heart talk over drinks, and I could even stay the night at her place since her husband was away on a business trip. In Angela's house lived her son Victor. He was a slender young man in his 20s. After finishing the conversation, I went back to the bathroom to get my body in order. It was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had little time to prepare. First, I did my manicure and pedicure, then waited 10 minutes for the nail polish to dry. After that, I applied a bright red lipstick and some powder and eyeshadow to emphasize my look. By 6 o'clock, I was ready, but there was only an hour left, and I had to hurry. I dressed elegantly, caught a cab, and headed to Angela's. We were in the living room, gossiping and sipping wine. Suddenly, we heard the door open, and Angela exclaimed, "Victor's here." I looked at him and remarked to my friend, "Your boyfriend has matured and become very handsome." Victor blushed and replied gratefully, "Thank you, Aunt Pamela." Angela immediately bustled over and sat him down at our table. Angela also joined, and Victor began to eat while we continued to enjoy the wine. Suddenly he asked, "Could you pour me some?" I didn't mind, but Angela reluctantly agreed, gritting her teeth. As a result, our company expanded. It was a pleasant evening, the likes of which I hadn't experienced in a long time, and Victor's unusual look at me made me feel uncomfortable. We sat like that for quite a while, probably until midnight. Suddenly, Angela suggested to end the evening as everyone was very intoxicated. We all agreed, and I was sent to another room. However, I could not sleep, as my thoughts were occupied with my friend's son. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and Victor entered it. Our eyes met, and there was a silent exchange of glances. Here, words were not needed, and so everything became clear. Then we started a relationship. I came to my senses in the morning and realized what I had done. I felt bad and wondered what would happen next. We all drank coffee together, and I decided to go home. And here, Victor volunteered to drive me in my father's car. I resisted, saying I didn't need to, I'd take a cab. But Angela insisted. I wanted to say goodbye and forget this awkwardness after yesterday. But Victor asked me to come over. How could I refuse him? And that's how Victor came to visit me for almost a whole week. After a passionate week with young Victor, I was over the moon. I knew it was wrong to cheat on my husband, but I couldn't get enough of Victor's manly warmth and tireless endurance. The things he did to me took my breath away. When Victor came to say goodbye, we inevitably found ourselves naked again and devouring each other right on the marital bed. As Victor was clutching my wrists above my head, the front door suddenly swung open. To my horror, my husband froze in the doorway with a suitcase in his hands. Victor and I rushed to cover ourselves with sheets while my husband screamed, "What the hell is going on here?" Before I could stammer an excuse, he burst into the room and grabbed Victor by the throat. "You think you can sleep with my wife, you snotty little brat?" Victor choked out an apology, trying to break free. I begged my husband to stop before he endangered the boy. After a tense moment, he pushed Victor away with a growling warning. "Get out now and never come back." Victor hurriedly threw on his clothes and ran away. My enraged husband lunged at me, demanding an explanation. I fell to my knees in pleading, swearing that it only happened because I was drunk and lonely without him. But he didn't care about that. "It's over between us," he hissed. "I'm taking our son, and you're getting divorce papers." He ran out, leaving me sobbing. Over the next few months, I tried desperately to win my husband back, but to no avail. We divorced. He took primary custody, and I only visited my son occasionally. My life had become one of depression and drunkenness due to the loss of my family. As for Victor, he was wise not to return my calls. My momentary weakness cost me everything I cared about. I'm still tormented by regret that I didn't resist Victor's charms. I doubt my husband will ever forgive me. Now I have a lonely future ahead of me, and I wish I could turn back the clock and make a better choice.